Welcome to the deep dive. We take a whole lot of information, mountains of it really, and boil it down to what you actually need to know, the essentials.
And today we're jumping into the history of, well, some really prominent hackers. We'll trace things from the very early days right up to the hunt for Parr back in the early 1990s.
It's quite a story. For this, we've dug into historical accounts, some deep technical analyses, journalistic reports, a bit of everything, really.
Yeah, and our mission, for you listening, is to help you grasp how hacker culture evolved. You know, who are the big names? What drove them? What's the impact that's still around today?
Right. We want to give in those key insights, maybe some surprising facts, too, without you getting lost in all the deep tech jargon.
Exactly. Now, first off, when we use the word hacker in this deep dives, you should understand we're talking about a pretty wide range of people.
Yeah, it covers everything from like the playful tinkerer just exploring systems all the way to people who definitely cross the line into cybercrime.
And the story really kicks off back in the 1960s. Think academic settings, places like MIT.
Ah, MIT, the Tech Model Railroad Club, the AI lab. That's where it starts.
That's the crucible, yeah. The vibe back then was all about playful cleverness. It wasn't malicious at first.
Not trying to break things just to break them.
Not initially, no. It was driven by a real love of excellence in programming, a desire to push technology, see what it could do, make it do cool stuff.
Like using a serial whistle to make free phone calls. That seems pretty playful and clever.
That's John Draper, Captain Crunch. We'll get to him. But yeah, that kind of thing, finding a simple flaw, exploiting it with some out-of-the-box thinking, it's a theme you'll see again and again.
Okay, so this early hacker ethic, what was it about?
It was very hands-on. A real drive to understand how things worked.
Yeah.
And a big belief in information being free, accessible.
And these little groups, they started popping up elsewhere too. Berkeley, Carnegie, Mellon.
Right. And then ARPANET comes along, the early internet, and suddenly these isolated pockets start connecting. MIT's PDP-10 computer became a sort of virtual meeting place.
So the focus was intellectual curiosity, making systems better, even.
That was a huge part of it initially. It's really different from the image of, the hooded figure stealing credit cards that came later. It's important to remember that origin exploring, mastering, sometimes challenging limits.
Right. And just so you know how we picked who to talk about when we say someone's relevant or prominent.
Yeah, we looked at a few things. Did they pioneer new techniques? Expose major flaws? Did they change how people thought about hackers?
Or did their actions lead to new laws, big societal shifts? Are their stories just key moments in this whole history?
Those are the filters, basically. And the time frame we're covering is the 60s through the early 90s. It really builds towards the story of Parr, or the Parmaster.
The Parmaster. He was big into X.25 networks, right? What exactly were those?
Think of X.25 as an early, more structured way for computers to talk over networks, kind of like a precursor to parts of the internet we use today. It was common in corporations and government.
So mastering that gave him serious access.
Huge access. And that made him a big target. The Secret Service chased him for years, late 80s, early 90s. His story really marks a turning point in how seriously law enforcement took this stuff.
Okay, let's dive in. The pioneers, the Phreaks, 60s to early 80s. And we're starting with someone maybe unexpected, Leon Theremin.
Theremin. Yeah, not a computer hacker as we think of it now, but definitely a precursor, especially in electronic eavesdropping.
He invented that musical instrument you play without touching. Right?
That's him. But he also designed something called the Thing. It was hidden inside the Great Seal of the United States, given to the U.S. ambassador in Moscow. A listening device.
Wow. How did it work?
It was passive. No power source inside. It was activated remotely by radio waves. It sat there, undiscovered, for 7 years.
7 years. That's incredible. And you said it's like an early RFID.
Conceptually, yes. Passive, remotely activated. He also made the Baron system, using infrared beams to pick up sound vibrations. It's all about exploiting technology for information gathering, a core hacking concept, really.
Okay, now on to someone more directly in the hacking lineage. John Draper, Captain Crunch.
Ah, Captain Crunch, seminal figure in phone phreaking. The story is classic. Early 70s, he figures out a toy whistle from Captain Crunch cereal.
The whistle, yes.
Produced a tone, 2600 hertz. And that specific frequency, that's what AT&T's long-distance network used back then to signal an available line.
So just blow the whistle into the phone.
And bam, you trick the system. It thinks the call ended, the line is open, ready for a new routing instruction. which you could then provide, allowing free calls anywhere.
That's amazing. And that led to blue boxes.
Exactly. Little electronic devices built to generate that 2600 hertz tone, and others needed to dial numbers. Draper really showed how you could understand and manipulate a huge, complex system with simple tools and, well, cleverness.
He's called the father of phone phreaking for a reason. And he inspired others, right? Like Steve Wozniak.
Definitely. Wozniak, pre-Apple, using the name Berkeley Blue. He got deep into phreaking.
And this was with Steve Jobs.
Yep. Inspired by Draper and an article in Esquire, was designed blue boxes, and he and Jobs actually built and sold them. Can you imagine?
Future titans of Silicon Valley running a small, illicit hardware business.
It really shows that early drive to master systems. Plus, that little venture definitely foreshadowed their later teamwork, didn't it?
It certainly did.
Yeah.
Okay, next up. Joe Ingressia, who went by Joy Bubbles. His talent was different.
Ingressia, or Joy Bubbles later in life, was incredible. Blind from a young age, he had perfect pitch, and he discovered as a kid he could whistle the phone control tones.
He could whistle 2600 hertz, just like that.
Just like that, and other control tones, too. He could literally whistle his way around the phone network. Made him a legend.
Was he anti-establishment like Draper?
Not really, no. He wasn't driven by that. He even worked for Bell Telephone for a bit. It was more about this deep, innate connection he had with the sounds of the network. Like a musician.
Amazing. Okay, shifting gears from phones to software foundations. Richard Stallman.
Stallman, key figure. Maybe known more for free software than hacking per se, but he came right out of that early MIT AI lab culture. He lived that hacker ethic of sharing, improving code together.
And he got really frustrated with software becoming proprietary. Lockdown.
Deeply frustrated. There's the famous story about a printer utility he couldn't fix because the source code was withheld. That kind of thing drove him. He believed software should be free.
Which led him to start the GNU project and the Free Software Foundation.
Exactly. And the whole idea of copyleft, using copyright law to ensure software remains free through licenses like the GPL. He's the father of free software, no question.
And that philosophy, it connects directly back to that early hacker ideal of open information, right?
Absolutely. It's taking that MIT ethos and applying it directly to code. Who controls the knowledge, the tools? That was his fight.
And speaking of foundational tools, Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson at Bell Labs, they built the infrastructure, didn't they?
In a huge way. Their work on the UNIX operating system and the C programming language, it's hard to overstate the impact. They essentially built the environment where a lot of later hacking happened.
UNIX's design being relatively open and its adoption in universities, that made it a playground.
A playground and a target, yeah. Its principles influenced so many later systems, like Linux. By mid-70s, UNIX combined with TCP/IP networking protocols. That became the core stage for hacking.
So they built the roads in the cars, basically.
That's a good way to put it. Ritchie and Thompson laid down the platform.
Now things start to get a bit darker, or at least more legally tricky. Ian Murphy, Captain Zap.
Murphy's case in 1981 is significant. He got into AT&T systems, messed with the billing clock, so daytime calls got nighttime rates.
But he wasn't necessarily a super technical wizard, more about talking his way in.
Seems like it. More reliant on social engineering, persuasion, than deep coding exploits. He even got students to steal equipment for him.
So tricking people, basically. And he was one of the first convicted for this kind of thing.
One of the first felony convictions, yeah.
Yeah.
Though the charges were things like fraud, not specifically hacking, under laws that didn't really exist yet.
But the case got attention, pushed things towards computer crime laws.
Definitely raised awareness, showed you didn't need to be a genius programmer to cause real disruption and financial damage. It was a warning shot.
And rounding out this early period, Susan Headley, Susan Thunder, or Susie Thunder, a prominent woman in the scene.
Headley was known for her social engineering skills. Really good at pretexting, manipulating people for info. She was part of a group called the Cyberpunks.
And hacked the U.S. phone system at 17. That's impressive.
Reportedly, yes. And she later teamed up with Kevin Mitnick, a name we'll definitely hear again, to target Pacific Bell's voicemail.
And she actually testified before the U.S. Senate.
In 1983, yeah. Gave them insights into the hacker and freak world. Her being a skilled woman in that mostly male domain, especially focused on social engineering, made her stand out.
Okay, so that covers the early ground. Exploration, phreaking, the beginnings of software freedom debates, and the first hints of serious crime and legal pushback. Now, mid to late 80s, networks are spreading, things get More intense.
Definitely. This is where networked hacking really takes off and public notoriety starts to build. Let's start with Bill Landreth, the Cracker.
The Cracker. He was part of a group called the Inner Circle.
That's right. Active in the early 80s, he got known for breaking into NASA and Department of Defense systems. Obviously, that turned some heads.
Hitting NASA and the DoD as a teenager. Yeah, that'll do it. And he wrote a book.
He did, Out of the Inner Circle. It was one of the first real insider looks into that world for a lot of people. He even tried to classify hackers by motivation. Not a student, tourist, cracker.
Interesting. And then he kind of vanished for a while.
Yeah, there's some mystery there, but he resurfaced later. His case really drove home that even supposedly secure government networks were vulnerable.
And then, in 1988, Robert Tappan Morris, the Morris Worm.
Ah, the Morris Worm. A huge moment. Morris, a grad student at Cornell at the time, releases this program onto the early internet.
It exploited flaws in Unix systems, right? Send mail, finger, things like that.
And weak passwords. It was designed to spread, but there was a flaw. It replicated way too aggressively.
So it didn't just spread, it clogged everything up.
Completely. It slowed down systems, crashed them. Thousands of computers were affected. It basically ground a large chunk of the internet to a halt. A massive wake-up call.
He claimed it wasn't meant to be destructive, but the impact was huge. And it led directly to
the creation of the CERT Coordination Center. CERT-CC, the first major incident response team for cybersecurity. That was a direct consequence. I remember when that hit, the whole network just slowed to a crawl. Scary stuff.
Now we start seeing more organized groups. The Legion of Doom, LOD, and Lloyd Blankenship, the mentor.
LOD, founded around '84. Highly skilled, big into phone systems, network intrusions. They even published technical journals online, sharing knowledge or techniques, depending on how you look at it.
And Blankenship, the mentor. He wrote that famous piece, The Conscience of a Hacker.
Yeah, often called the Hacker Manifesto. Wrote it after he got arrested in 1986. It really framed hacking as being about curiosity, exploration, pushing boundaries, challenging authority.
That line, my crime is that of curiosity.
My crime is that of judging people by what they say and think, not what they look like. My crime is that of outsmarting you, something that you will never forgive me for. It became incredibly influential in shaping hacker identity.
But you have to wonder how much was genuine philosophy versus, well, justifying illegal acts.
That's the perennial question, isn't it? And his legal troubles weren't over. Later, the Secret Service seized the manuscript for his GURPS cyberpunk game.
The role-playing game? Why?
They thought it was some kind of handbook for computer crime. Led to a big lawsuit. Steve Jackson Games versus Secret Service. A whole other fascinating story about misunderstandings between tech culture and law enforcement.
Another key LOD member, Chris Goggins, Eric Bloodaxe.
Goggins, yeah. Founding member of LOD, also edited Phreaks magazine for a time, another influential hacker publication, very respected technically. Blankenship himself praised his skills.
And like some others, he later moved into security work, worked with law enforcement.
He did. Established a security company. It's a common trajectory. But there was that interesting contradiction.
Right. He publicly claimed he had ethical lines, wouldn't destroy data.
Yeah, but then there was this intercepted phone call from 1990. Him and another hacker known as Phoenix, apparently planning to steal source code from a company, Execucom, maybe to sell it.
So the stated ethics didn't quite match the private conversation.
Seemed that way. The Secret Service raided him over it, but ultimately no charges were filed in that instance. It just shows the complexities, the gray areas in the scene back then.
And then there was the rivalry, LOD versus MOD, Masters of Deception.
Ah, MOD, the New York crew. Formed late 80s, very focused on the phone company infrastructure, the switches, the mainframes, big RBOCs, regional Bell operating companies.
Their name, MOD, was that a deliberate jab at LOD?
Some thought so. Like, LOD got busted, maybe they were modernizing hacking, or maybe implying LOD was getting old. They had their own philosophy, shared info internally, but were more selective externally.
And Mark Abaney, fiber optic, was a central figure.
Definitely. Young, prominent. He was briefly associated with LOD too, but really made his name with MOD. He loved digging into the phone systems, found early vulnerabilities in DEC mini computers.
And MOD targeted phone companies Martin Marietta. But eventually, law enforcement caught up.
Oh, yeah. Abee's place was searched in 1912. They wrongly suspected him in an AT&T network crash. Then arrests in 91, federal charges based on wiretaps. He ended up doing time in federal prison.
He got a lot of media attention, though. Robin Hood of cyberspace.
That whole Modlud thing became quite the media narrative. It really marked a period where hacking burst into public consciousness, and the authorities started cracking down much harder.
Okay, now shifting focus a bit. Late 80s, early 90s. Australia becomes a real hotspot for hacking activity.
It really does. And this leads to some major international law enforcement collaborations. First up, Julian Assange.
Ah, Assange. Before WikiLeaks.
Years before. Operating under the name Mendax in Melbourne. He was part of a group called International Subversives, with guys like Trax and Prime Suspect.
And they called themselves white hats, meaning they didn't cause damage.
That was their claim. They'd get in, look around, but not steal or destroy.
Yeah.
But they're targets. Pretty serious stuff. U.S. military networks, Melnet, DDN, NASA, Nortel.
They were behind the wank worm, too.
That's been suggested, but never definitively proven. Assange himself used social engineering on Australia's telecom, OTC, and he wrote code for massive attacks, his words on the U.S. military. Claimed they controlled Melnet for 2 years.
2 years. That's a bold claim. Did the authorities buy the white hat thing?
Not really. The U.S. pushed Australia to act. His place was raided early on, no charges then. But eventually in '96, he pleaded guilty to hacking charges in a plea deal.
And you can definitely see the seeds of WikiLeaks there. Accessing sensitive networks, information freedom. Plus, his research for the book Underground came from this period.
Absolutely. It showed how vulnerable supposedly secure networks were, even back then.
Then there was another Melbourne group, The Realm. Phoenix, Electron, Noom.
The Realm was very active, very skilled, targeted defense, nuclear research networks. Phoenix, Nashan, even Shame was the standout. Brilliant, but apparently quite arrogant.
He hit NASA, Lawrence Livermore, using dial-up, X.25, the internet.
All of the above. And he was so confident. After breaking into systems belonging to security bigwigs like Eugene Spafford and Clifford Stoll, he actually called John Markoff at the New York Times to brag about it.
Called the New York Times? Wow. That takes guts. Or something else.
Audacity, definitely. They also got hold of a restricted security list called Zardos and used it for widespread attacks. Their speed made people think it was automated at first.
How did they get caught?
The Australian Federal Police, AFP, went deep. Undercover work. And crucially, they got warrants for remote data interception, basically, tapping their modem lines. First time that was used globally in a computer crime case, January 1990.
First time ever. That's significant.
Landmark case. They coordinated simultaneous raids in April 90. Phoenix got community service and a suspended sentence. It really woke everyone up to the global reach of hacking from a home PC. Again, Underground, the book, and the documentary, In the Realm of the Hackers, cover this really well.
And similar things were happening in the UK. Pad and Gandalf, 8 Legimeter.
Right. Pad and Gandalf, their real names aren't public, formed 8 Legimeter, skilled network intruders. They captured worm source code like the Father Christmas worm, claiming it was just for study, not malicious use. Left little calling cards, 8 Legimeter was here, on hacked university systems.
But study or not, breaking in is still illegal.
Exactly. Pad actually tried to quit hacking, but got drawn back in. They were raided in June 91, prosecuted under the UK's new Computer Misuse Act of 1990.
That act was pretty new then, right?
Very new. Their case was an early important test for it. They pleaded guilty, got prison time in '93, showed the UK was serious, even if the motive wasn't direct financial gain. Their story's in Underground, too.
So, late 80s, early 90s, hacking goes global, law enforcement follows suit, new laws get tested, a real escalation. Now, into the early 90s proper, fugitives, high-stakes intrusions. This is where some of the most famous names emerge, starting with Kevin Mitnick.
Mitnick, Condor, maybe the most famous hacker ever. Active for years, became the FBI's most wanted computer criminal. Public enemy, #1, that kind of thing.
He started with phreaking, right, but moved way beyond that.
Oh yeah, phreaking. Computer intrusions, DEC systems, ARPANET nodes. But his real superpower was social engineering. He was incredibly good at talking people into giving up passwords, secrets, access, just pure manipulation sometimes.
And he was a fugitive for a long time, cloning cell phones to stay hidden.
For years. The cell phone cloning was notorious. His capture in '95 by Tsutomu Shimomura, another security expert whose systems Mitnick had compromised, was huge news.
And there was that crazy quote about him starting nuclear war by whistling.
Total exaggeration, probably fed by prosecutors or the media, but it showed the level of fear and, frankly, misunderstanding around hackers then. After prison, though, he famously became a white hat security consultant.
A common path, it seems. Then Kevin Poulsen, Dark Dante.
Poulsen, another big name, also started in phreaking. His most famous stunt was hacking the phone lines for the LA radio station KIIS-FM, in 1990.
The Porsche. He rigged it so he'd be the 102nd caller.
Yeah, exactly. Guaranteed himself the win. He was featured on NBC's Unsolved Mysteries, went on the run for about 17 months before getting caught, did time in prison.
But he also turned things around afterwards.
Dramatically. Became a respected senior editor and investigative journalist for Wired magazine. Broke major stories, like identifying a sex offender using MySpace, another case of skills being reapplied.
Then there's Herbert Zinn, Shadowhawk. Significant because
He was the first juvenile convicted under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, CFAA. He was only 16-17 when he was active in 86-87.
a high school dropout hitting AT&T, Bell Labs, DoD system.
Yeah, even stole details of a $1 million AI program. He also hit the Washington Post, a hospital system. And he was very active on bulletin board systems, BBSs, sharing what he found on forums like Phreaks 2600.
And that sharing, the bragging, that's what tripped him up.
Seems so. His conviction in early 89 was a big deal. Showed the law was coming for minors, too. It highlighted the role of BDSs in spreading knowledge, but also as intel sources for law enforcement.
Next, Vladimir Levin and the Citibank heist. This felt different big money.
It was 1994. Levin, a Russian programmer, managed to access Citibank's dial-up wire transfer system, attempted to transfer over $10 million out.
How did he get in? Was it sophisticated hacking?
The official story is he used stolen customer credentials, maybe intercepted calls, but there's this persistent counter-narrative.
St. Petersburg hackers.
Exactly. A group in St. Petersburg might have gained the initial X.25 network access and perhaps sold it or passed it to Levin. Raises questions about attribution, maybe even early hacking as a service.
Regardless, he was caught.
Tracked by the FBI, arrested by Interpol in London in 95, extradited to the U.S., pleaded guilty, got 3 years. Citibank recovered most of the money, but it was a huge shock to the financial system.
Definitely pushed banks to upgrade security. Physical tokens, things like that started appearing.
Absolutely. Showed the vulnerability of purely digital systems for large transfers.
And finally, the figure who sort of culminates this era for our deep dive, Parr, the Parmaster.
Parr, a real enigma. American. His expertise was X.25 networks, that crucial datacomms tech of the time. His alias apparently came from early Apple SOSN copy protection breaking and the X.25 PAD command, described as paranoid, intensely private.
Master of X.25. What did he do with that knowledge?
Besides breaking copy protection, he seemed obsessed with gathering information. There was that incident during Operation Desert Shield, the password Parmaster G-Sitham, appearing on Timnet systems.
What was that about? A warning? Bragging?
Motives are murky. Maybe pointing out vulnerabilities. His later profile in Phreaks magazine offered a glimpse. Really strange stuff. Talked about trying to descry the future, critiquing authority, speculating about mind control due to memory issues. Very unconventional.
And he became a fugitive.
Yep. Failed to show for a court hearing in 89. The Secret Service pursued him intensely for over 2 years, from 89 to late 91. There are stories of raids, like one at a motel in Black Mountain with another hacker called Nibbler, records getting complicated.
Why such an intense pursuit? Just the X.25 knowledge.
That knowledge was key. X.25 underpinned so much critical infrastructure back then. Someone with his deep understanding was seen as a major potential threat. There was a raid in 91 where agents allegedly seized credit reports for the president and VP from him. He was eventually jailed in New York.
His story feels like the peak of that era, where deep system knowledge made you a huge target.
Exactly. It embodies that period of intense government pursuit of hackers who understood the core infrastructure. The secrecy around his case, even after capture, hints at how seriously his knowledge was taken. Underground and his Phreaks writings give a vivid picture of a hacker on the run.
So wrapping this up, what a journey. From MIT's playful tinkerers to Parr being hunted by the Secret Service.
It really is. We've seen those threads: curiosity, challenge, anti-authoritarian streaks, information freedom run through it all, but also divergences, the different motivations, different ethics, the rise of financial crime.
And the impact is still with us. The Morse worm leading to CERT, the laws passed in response to people like Murphy and Zinn, the security upgrades after Levin hit Citibank.
And even the culture. Free software, open source, online communities, they all have roots back in that early hacker ethos.
Oh, the word hacker itself changed so much. From a badge of honor for skill
to often meaning criminal. Although, even within the community, ethical lines started getting drawn more clearly. White hats, black hats, gray hats.
And Parr's story really feels like a capstone on that specific era. Possessing that kind of deep, specialized knowledge of critical systems put a massive target on your back.
It did. Which leads us to the final thought for you listening. Think about that tension. The drive to explore, innovate, push boundaries, versus the need for security, control, stability in our digital world. How do we balance that? The legacy of these pioneers, good and bad, is still shaping that debate every single day. It's something worth pondering.